Hey Panthers! This week in ELA, we're going to be talking about how setting impacts conflict, but more specifically, we're going to be drawing inferences. So make sure you've got your remote learning book and you've also got a pen or pencil and ready to dive into this lesson.
So let's just get right in to our topic 3, how setting impacts conflict ELA lesson. And more specifically, we're going to be talking a lot about inferences during this lesson today. So if you do not have your remote learning book directly in front of you, pause the video and go grab it and make sure that you're using that pause and play feature throughout these videos to help ensure that you're understanding and that you're able to write down your notes that you need. So that's one of the best things about digital learning is that basically you've got your teacher teaching, but you can play and pause her as you need. So let's get started with citing our evidence and talking about making inferences. It says, have you heard the story of Pinocchio, the wooden boy who came to life? Each time he lies, his nose grows. Later in the story, Pinocchio says he has been to school, and zoink, his nose grows. Now, the author doesn't say at this particular point in the story that Pinocchio lied, but you can make the inference, which is a conclusion based on what you already know and relevant text evidence, that he did lie. So an inference is going to be, it's a guess, essentially, a reasonable guess based on the details that you read in a passage or something that you can see in a picture. It's anything that's not directly shown or explicitly shown or stated to you. It's basically you making an inference, reading in between the lines. So let's read this paragraph and we're going to go over this chart together. It says, Abraham Lincoln once said, reminder that as we're reading this passage, I want you to think of yourself as a detective. And the narrator doesn't necessarily say that he had a bad recital experience, but he gives us plenty of clues, and that's what we're going to be using in the chart below. So let's read about Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln once said, whatever you are, be a good one. Easy for him to say. He was good at everything. It's nice advice, I guess. Still, you can say that you're going to be good at playing the piano. You can even say that you'll perform beautifully at the big recital. You can say that all you want. And you can still forget the notes to your song halfway through and run off the stage in tears. I wonder what Lincoln would have said about that. He probably wouldn't have felt as miserable as I do right now, at the very least. So we're going to organize and we're going to really analyze these details and what we already know to figure out or determine an inference. And we're going to look at the first column is what we know. Something that we know, people sometimes feel bad about themselves when they're embarrassed, and some people react differently than others. But when you're embarrassed about something, there's no doubt about it, you don't feel good inside. Whether you react by putting your head down or running out of the room or yelling or just being quiet, you still don't feel good inside. So that's something that we already know. And looking back into this passage, what do we see that our narrator or our author says? It says the first bullet point that they pulled was, still, you can say that you're going to be good at playing the piano. So our next detail that I think is very helpful about what the narrator says to get to our inference would be that our next sentence says you can say that you're going to be good at playing the piano. You can say that all you want and you can still forget the notes to your song. That seems like a bad day. So I'm going to put that in a reminder. You could pick anything else. You can pick a different sentence, you can even say you'll perform beautifully at the big recital, or something else that the narrator says that, well, we want to make sure that we're supporting our inference that the narrator had a terrible time performing at his piano recital. So we know that people feel bad when they're embarrassed. We know that he says that even though you say in your mind 1,000 times you're going to be good at something like playing the piano, you can say that all you want and you still forget the notes to your song halfway through and run off the stage in tears. So I think that sentence really kind of helps explain how terrible of a time our poor guy had at his piano recital. And then for our final inference, we can say, and even when we read throughout this experience, did it straight up tell you that the narrator was the one that was the piano player that told himself he was going to be great, that memorized all of his notes, and that he went to perform on his recital and he forgot all of his notes and got embarrassed, which is something that we already know. And so he overall had a terrible piano recital. It doesn't say that in here. Does it explicitly say the narrator had a bad piano recital? No. But we can use all the things that he says and the things that we already know to come up with that inference. The final little piece of information on this first slide says, when reading, always base your inferences on relevant textual evidence or details that directly support your inference. An unsupported inference won't make your nose grow an inch, but you won't be on your way to a better understanding of the story either. So what they're reminding at the bottom is, and I tell you guys this often, especially when we're summarizing, that there are some details in stories that are much more important than others. So when you are coming up with an inference, and you're making sure that you are using relevant text details. So if throughout the text it's like a big, giant, long story and there's a very small detail about the girl goes to the cupboard and she chooses the red cup other than the blue cup. So I'm not going to make this giant inference about how the main character hates the color blue because she chose the red cup, because that seems to be like a very, very, very small and not important textual detail. And we need to be thinking about those big text details and those big inferences that are going to help us understand the story better. And whenever we're making inferences, it's also helping us determine our main idea and our theme. And those are some things that we might be working on a little bit later this week. So going on to our next slide. This is Athena, Arachne, and the Weaving Contest, written by Sophia Lilios. And this is a myth. It says Athena, the goddess of wisdom, was an exceptional weaver. She shared her knowledge with humans as long as they consistently showed her their deepest gratitude. Athena's most talented student was a young woman named Arachne. Each day, Athena and Arachne sold their creations at a country market, and everyone said Arachne's cloth was incredible. Athena overheard Arachne telling customers she taught herself to weave. Athena cringed as she listened to Arachne's lies. Then, on one fateful day, Arachne kept bragging to customers that she was the greatest weaver in the world and that her creations were more beautiful than all the others at the market. So we're going to be looking at this question. How does Athena feel about Arachne's bragging? Make an inference about how Athena feels. Support your inference with two relevant details from the text. So the author doesn't necessarily state how she feels. I never can go back into my text and say, oh, right here it says Athena feels like this. So I need to go back and find some details and using my own knowledge about why people are acting the way that they do in the story. So let's look at this chart and we're going to come up with one more detail from the text and also an inference. So what we already know is that someone who expects gratitude, so someone who expects to be thanked for helping, would probably be upset if she didn't get it. So they're saying that people that are people deserve the credit for when they help you. So some details from the text, that's what we already know. So somebody who's expecting you to be thankful and then you turn around and you're not thankful, you could see that they might get upset. So now we're going to look at some details from the text and find out another detail that we're going to add to this. So the first detail says, she shared her knowledge with humans as long as they consistently showed her their deepest gratitude. So how can I tell, what's another detail from the text that I can tell that Athena's upset? I know that she expects gratitude. Look right here, it says consistently showed her their deepest gratitude. So she expected to not only be thanked the first time, but consistently, which means nonstop or, often. So I know that she expects Athena expects gratitude from those that she teaches to weave. But when she hears that Athena's bragging, how does she react? Is she cringed? It says Athena cringed. And if you don't know what a cringe is, it's when you make a weird, disgusted look with your face. So, Athena cringed. Remember, I'm taking a direct quote from the story, so I'm putting that in quotation marks. So, Athena cringed as she listened to Arachne's lies. So my inference, I can see that she was expecting to be thanked often, and she was cringing when she heard Arachne talking about she was the best weaver and how she taught herself. So the inference that I'm going to draw from all of this information is that Athena is upset that Arachne is bragging that she learned, to weave by herself. So never in this text did it tell me that Athena was upset. But I know that most people get upset when they're expecting to be thanked, and then not only did she not get thanked, but the person that she helped just turned around and took all the credit. So I can use my details from the text and what I already know to come up with that inference that Athena's pretty mad at Arachne. And then down here, using details from the chart to support the inference, we don't really have to do that because we already wrote down the details from the text. So let's go on to we're going to continue reading. An old woman in a cloak smiled and challenged Arachne to a weaving contest, which Arachne gladly accepted. The rules were simple. Each would weave one complete tapestry by nightfall, and customers would judge the winner. Throughout the day, the two sat at looms, weaving furiously. Just before sunset, they finished. Both tapestries were marvelous to behold, but the crowd chose the old woman, for her creation was flawless. Spin and weave forever without my help, fool, the old woman suddenly said, and pointing one finger at Arachne, turned her into a spider. And then here's my close reading. On page 46, the author says that Athena shares her skills with humans on one condition. Circle the phrase stating this condition. So I'm going to go back to my page here, and I'm going to circle what is the one condition that Athena will share her knowledge with, and it says as long as they consistently show their deepest gratitude. And now let's look at our multiple choice question. Which sentence best explains why Arachne was turned into a spider? Is it A, the old woman had special powers? B, Arachne did not show her thanks to Athena? C, Athena was disguised as the old woman? Or D, like Arachne, spiders are good at weaving? So looking at this hint, because I know that many of you, because I'm thinking the same thing, are thinking that maybe that Athena was that old woman that beat her in the weaving process. However, this question is asking us why. So why was she turned into a spider? Not how. So why was why was Arachne turned into a spider? Because she didn't show thanks to Athena. It has nothing to do with who did it, but why it happened. And that correct answer would be B. Look at the answer you chose above. Explain how the details in the story helped you infer why Arachne was turned into a spider. So when I'm looking at this, I inferred that Arachne was turned into a spider because she did not show her thanks to Athena. The detail, if I could spell, the detail that helped me come up with my inference was, and I'm going to use a quote here, and I'm going to go back to that, what we circled back on page number 43, I think, and that what we circled was that, oh goodness, sorry everybody, I lost my spot. Okay, what we circled here was that as long as they consistently showed her deepest gratitude, then Athena was sharing her knowledge with humans. So when we go down to here, and I'm using this direct quote, the detail that helped me come up with my inference was that Athena helped humans to weave as long as they and this is the part I'm going to put in quotes, consistently showed their gratitude, because that is a direct quote from the text. And now let's move on to our guided practice. So remembering for Athena, and the inference are going to be reading in between the lines and coming up with things that aren't necessarily directly stated, but things that you can come up with using what you already know, your prior knowledge, and then some more details from the text. So let's look at this guided lesson. This is called The Wisdom of the Willow Tree, written by Wilson McEshone. And remember, I always like to read our study buddy before I read our passage. So our study buddy over here says, based on the first paragraph, I think young man is a patient and determined person. I'll underline the phrase that tells me about young man's character. So when we're reading, It looks like they already did. And she said he's very determined because he hiked tirelessly, and that's why that's underlined in our text. So now we're going to read the wisdom of the willow tree. Young man, reminder that is all in capitals because that is going to be a proper noun. That's what they refer to him as his name. So that's why that M is capital. Young man often felt lost and pondered questions about the purpose of his life. He decided to journey far away, seeking wisdom. He hiked tirelessly for several days. One day, the sun blazed down, and he was hot, thirsty, and desperate for shade. In the distance, he saw a willow tree and crawled to it. Exhausted, he lay between its roots and had a vivid dream. In the dream, the tree had a wise old face that smiled at him and looked strangely familiar. Young man said to the tree, I have failed on my journey. I still don't understand how to live my life. I'm thirsty and weary, and I cannot summon the strength to return home. The tree then reached down its oldest branch, stroked young man gently on the cheek, and said, Sleep in my shade. I am old and know the value of rest. When you wake up, follow my roots. They are wrinkled, but know the way. Young man awoke and followed the tree's enormous roots to a burbling stream. As he drank, he saw his reflection and was shocked when he realized that the face he had seen in the willow's trunk had been his own, only much older. He smiled as he now understood that he must age like the wise tree and help others find their way when they feel lost and defeated. Over time, he would gradually become wise man, whom people would seek out for help, shelter, and advice. This, he knew, would take much strength and patience. So, really quick, some comprehension questions that I know that these aren't written anywhere, but pause. I'm going to ask you a question, pause it, answer it out loud, and then play it again and see if you got it right. So, really quick, why does the young man even crawl to the willow tree? So, if I was going to go back, pause the video. Why does the young man come to the willow tree? Well, I can look back and see that he is hot, thirsty, and desperate for shade. Reminder, whenever you're being asked a comprehension question, that answer is always going to be in your text. And the comprehension aspect of all of these iReady assignments, we don't really get to see comprehension questions being asked because I'm not directly in front of you. So if you pause, answer, and check it, it'll be very helpful. So the next one would be, does the willow tree actually speak to young man? So if I go back to my text, I can see, no, he doesn't actually talk to him. Because right here in paragraph 2, the author says, he lay between its roots and had a vivid dream. So we know that although he deems that the tree was speaking to him, he really was sleeping and dreaming about the tree talking to him. And your last comprehension question, what lesson does young man learn by the end of the story? So if you pause, and when I go back and try to find this answer, I'm looking in this last paragraph where I can see that he learns that he's got to grow older, like the tree, and help younger people who are defeated and lost, just like he was. And then he'll become the wise man. So those are just some quick comprehension questions. Always trying to exercise that skill when you're reading any passage. whether it be a newspaper article or your independent reading book or your independent work on this, those comprehension questions or being able to go back and answer the text are going to stay with you forever. So might as well get really good at them. Let's go back to our actual lesson and talk about this close reading. What does young man learn on his journey? Underline the sentences that explain the lesson of his journey. So let's see what young man what he learns. So what does young man underline? The sentences that explain the lesson. So the lesson, I think, is right here. He now understood that he must age like the wise tree and help others find their way when they feel lost and defeated. I think that sentence right there really explains the overall lesson, why he went out, not necessarily why he went out there, but the lesson that he learned from being out there. And then our second part, we're going to be circling words and phrases that are relevant evidence supporting the inference that the tree is kind and wise. So anything on here that shows us that the tree is going to be wise and kind. So looking back in paragraph 2, I can see it says the tree has a wise old face. So that really makes me think that he's wise because it says that his face is wise. And then something else in the same exact sentence, but kind of shows the opposite, the kindness aspect, is that he was smiling at him. He smiled at him, and that shows he's kind. And then some other aspects of the text or some details that we see about the tree are things like, right here, it says that he gently, stroke. Think about a branch coming down and, like touching you or petting you. And so the fact that he did that gently really shows that he's kind and he knows what he's doing and he seems to be very wise. And also, I'm just going to keep it moving. We're going to go, when you sleep in my shade, I am old and know the value of rest. That's showing wisdom. When you wake up on my root, they are wrinkled, but they know the way. That's going to be the last one that I circled. They are wrinkled, but they know the way. Because if they didn't know the way, they wouldn't be that wise now, would they? So let's move on to our questions. Using the hints, remember we always have the hints on the side. A student makes the following claim about the young man in The Wisdom of the Willow Tree. So this is the claim or the inference. Young man has to develop skills if he wants to become wise man. Which sentence best from the text best supports this claim? Is it A, he decided to journey far away seeking wisdom? B, this he knew would take much strength and patience? C, I am old and I know the value of rest? Or D, in the distance, he saw a willow tree and crawled to it. So we're trying to think of which one of those 4 sentences helps support the fact that young man's not just going to become the wise man. He's got to develop some skills. And I think that for this one, I can be eliminating some answers that kind of don't make sense. Like, in the distance, he saw a willow tree and crawled to it. That sentence doesn't make a lot of sense. It describes the character's actions. It doesn't really deal with the skill that he has to develop. It just tells us, okay, he saw it, he crawled to it. A is kind of talking about his motivation. He was looking for the wisdom, but it really doesn't address the skills and what he needs to do in order to become the wise man. And then for number C, I know that's not the right answer because that's just a line of dialogue that's spoken by the willow tree. It really doesn't have any sort of support to this claim. So my correct answer is B. This, he knew, would take much strength and patience. I know because he claims that at the end in his lesson when he wakes up and he is still young man, even though he saw himself as wise man in his dream, and he knows that it's going to take a lot of strength and patience. Those are the two skills that he really needs to develop in order to be successful as a wise man or even become a wise man. So let's look at number 2. Which sentence from the text best shows that young man is happy about his encounter with the willow tree? Is it A, young man awoke and followed the tree's enormous roots to a burbling stream? Is it B, as he drank, he saw his reflection and was shocked when he realized the face he had seen in the willow's trunk had been his own, only much older? Is it C, I'm thirsty and weary, and I cannot summon the strength to return home? Or is it D, he smiled as he now understood that he must age like the wise tree and help others find their way when they feel lost and defeated? So I think that the one that's showing that he's very happy with his encounter, with the fact that he found the willow tree, he took that nap, he had that dream, the one that really shows me that he is happy is going to be D. He smiled and he now understood that he must age like the wise tree and help others find their way when they feel lost and defeated. So the young man is described as smiling when he's thinking about meeting, seeing that tree, and, working on those skills. Choice A is all his actions. So there's nothing in this sentence A that shows anything about feelings, about him being happy. It's just actions. And B, it describes him as shocked. So when I think of somebody being shocked, I don't necessarily think of them as being happy. And then C is just describing him as thirsty and weary. And again, those are some adjectives or describing words that I don't really associate with being happy. So in this case, I'm going to take the he smiled and say that smiling is really showing us that he's happy about his encounter with the willow tree. And then number 3 says, explain how the willow tree's kindness and wisdom help young man. Include at least one detail from the story to support your explanation. This hint over here is super helpful. How does young man feel when he approaches the willow tree? How does the willow tree encounter change young man's feelings? So remember, he was tired and thirsty and weary. And then when he left him, he was pretty happy. So I'm going to write down, when young man approaches the willow tree, he is, and this is a direct quote, so that's why I'm putting in quotation marks, thirsty, hot, thirsty, and weary. Forgot about the hot part. Hot, thirsty, and weary. Oh my goodness. Okay. So, ready? Explain how the willow tree's kindness and wisdom help young man. Include at least one detail from the story to support your explanation. So this hint right here is super helpful. And it says, how does young man feel when he approaches the willow tree? How does the willow tree encounter change young man's feelings? So first I want to focus on how he felt when he first encountered the willow tree. So young man when young man approaches the willow tree, he is, and I'm using a quote because this is going to be a direct quote from the passage, hot, thirsty, and desperate for shade. And that's a direct quote from our text. The author states he is exhausted. and he claims that he has failed on his journey. So that answers our first question. How does Young Man feel when he approaches the willow tree? Well, he was pretty hot, thirsty, desperate for shade, exhausted, etc., etc., etc. The willow tree's kindness and wisdom, because remember, I'm using the direct verbiage from my question. So the willow tree's kindness and wisdom make young man happy and understand what he must do. So he started off as hot, thirsty, and desperate, and in the end, they use words to describe him like happy and smiling, and he understands that he's got to be patient and knows that that's what he's got to do. So this is the end of the guided lesson and the beginning of the independent practice. For the independent practice this week, you're going to be reading A Sewing Sensation written by William Rivera. And there are 4 questions that go along with it, 3 multiple choice and a short response, and then a little bit of a longer response. You can submit this to me on Google Classroom. If you want to do it interactively, you may finish it handwritten in your remote learning books, snap a quick picture of it, shoot it over in an email, or you can send it to me on Snapchat. But this independent work right here, these 4 questions, this is what I need from you. I hope you guys have an amazing week, and I'll be seeing you tomorrow.